So we're gonna go over some basics of some color shading. Supplies you'll definitely want to need something colorful. I'm gonna use an apple, and I'm probably gonna cut it in half, one because I'm definitely gonna eat this apple after the demonstration, but also to kind of get some variation with the outside array of colors and tones versus the inside meat of the subject. I have some chalk pastels. These are by Sargent. They're pretty inexpensive. Most people like chalk pastels, one, because they're really highly pigmented, meaning that they do get all over you. So definitely recommend putting something down. I have a table covered with like craft paper all the time in my studio. But if you're working from home and you don't want this pigment on your desk or your material on your desk, definitely recommend putting something down, or else it can stain certain things. But they're really good to kind of blend. They blend similar to how vine charcoal and charcoal blends. You are also welcome to use whatever color materials you have. So if you have like crayons, colored pencils, watercolor, anything like that. I have in the color theory presentation on Canvas, there are some just quick tips on how to shade with each one. There's a plethora of YouTube videos that are far better quality than mine out there. So I'm just gonna go over quickly kind of how to assess color. One thing is that color is very, very, very subjective, and that we all see color differently. The lighting impacts how we see color, so I'm doing this in an evening setting. My studio has lights on, and there's a little bit of the kind of daylight you can see. So usually daylight or natural light has a little bit cooler of an appearance in temperature. So you can see some of the highlights reflecting are a little bit cooler of a white versus the kind of yellowish reflections of the artificial lights. So depending on your lighting situation, that can impact your color. I have a couple of sheets of just some cardstock here, right? And I'm gonna kind of go through just quickly. Looking at this now, I'm gonna draw this from the front perspective. I know you're only seeing the kind of top-down perspective. Well, I could probably draw it from the top-down perspective. We'll work on it. But you can see that color also reflects onto your object, right? So the color of this green can greatly change depending on like what's reflected off the table, right? So I get a lot more of like kind of tealish blue shadows versus more warm shadows just on the brown paper. If I switch to, I have a kind of very hot magenta pink, it's a little bit more contrast, and I can see like especially down here there's more of this kind of orangish yellow color reflecting off. I have orange, right? That's gonna make everything feel more golden and really bring out the warm side of this Granny Smith apple. And then of course the green, because this is such a bright, intense green color and it's really pigmented versus the apple, which is not this color. This is gonna look a lot more dull sitting next to its very like prismatic version, right? So color theory can be a lot of fun to play with, but I wanted to show you that kind of quick demonstration. So I have my sketchbook here. I'm gonna stick to the green paper, one because it's kind of cool, but I have a lot of other reflected light coming from this as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut my apple off screen just in case I cut my finger. All right, little bit of an open apple here, kind of lean it up. You can see that this has like little to no color or pigment. So it's gonna be trickier for me to kind of get that color. What I am gonna do in tangent with this video is on Canvas, I'll post a still shot of the angle I'm drawing from. So the tendency is to kind of look at our palette of colors and just think from the get-go, like go for the most pigmented. Usually what we see from life isn't as vibrant as the box of colors that you might have, right? So it's important to know how to mix color. Right, so I'm just gonna loosely sketch out. This is an HB pencil. I'd prefer a 2H pencil, but it's what we got in my studio right now. I'm just gonna kind of gesture in really, really lightly. And again, I'm working from my angle, not the top-down view you see in the camera. Right, general shapes, I kind of get some of these shadow markings, plus minus, right? Keep it gestural for a couple different reasons. I know that these pastels, especially some of the lighter colors I'm going to end up using, so the yellows, the light green, some of this won't cover up with the graphite, right? So it's fine to sketch in, you just don't want to sketch in something really dark, because depending on what material you're using, chalk pastels, oil pastels, colored pencils, it might not love the graphite and it might still show those initial lines. What you can do though is kind of like take your eraser, very lightly kind of get rid of some of the lines, right? Almost like you have a very, very faint ghost image, right? So I can still see some of my initial lines, but they're just not as dark. Alternative is to take a really very light, unpigmented color, like this yellow color here, and sketch out directly with your material. Now, obviously, if you're working in a color material like pen and ink, that's a little harder to do, right? But if you're working with a soft material, you can absolutely kind of sketch in like this and kind of go from there. Not quick. I'm gonna try to keep this under 20 minutes, but don't hate me if it goes over. I don't ever wanna like press for gold right out of the gate, right? Because unlike your vine charcoal where your chamois can really get this off, I might be able to erase some of this, but the pigment's always gonna stay there, right? So unlike the kind of charcoal where you can really get a lot of it up, sometimes with certain colors, especially your reds and your blues and your purples are really pigmented by nature colors, they can be really hard to get up all the way. And depending on the material, like chalk pastel is usually forgiving. I also didn't press down a whole lot. That's not coming up, right? And so just being mindful that it helps to approach this with a kind of light hand at first, right? So it also helps to kind of work from your lightest colors that you see to your darker colors, and reserve mixing in your gray, your black, or some of to get those kind of chromatic gray or very muted colors, mix those darker tones later, right? So I'm gonna kind of gesture in lightly the kind of meat of my apple. I'm gonna lay down some white. Notice I'm not really pressing that hard. I know it's white on white. Don't yell at me. I'm gonna gently kind of put back in some of this yellow. And what I'm thinking is maybe just a touch of this green and a touch of this tan, right? As I work too, I know that my apple is gonna change. It's gonna start to get more of that kind of browning that happens when air hits apples, so. All right. Really, really soft kind of touch. Notice I didn't put a lot of material down. I'm fairly happy with that base color. Helps to get a base color knowing I can add in white or a lighter color to put my highlights back in, and then work in my shadows a little bit later. With chalk pastels, it's really nice because I can kind of add a little bit on top. I'll start to get a lot of material and I can blend it off, and I can still really affect my color by this layering method. Unlike oil pastels where you have to be a little bit more strategic and careful about what colors you mix because the material itself likes to kind of pill up. But I'm working something also. Now I'm keeping the sticks kind of together, but you can absolutely, here's a cracked one, you can snap them in half to get a smaller piece. There's no shame in that. I'm gonna try to preserve these though because I borrowed these from the classroom. All right, so I'm not totally sad about how this is looking so far. But I try to pack in a little bit cooler of a temperature of white. So what I'm gonna do, it definitely helps to experiment. So I'm gonna just get in a little bit of this blue. Notice I put barely any because blue is really pigmented. I just wanna get it to be a little bit cooler of a kind of muted color. Happier with that. Is it perfect? No, color is super subjective. So I'm gonna work on the meat part of the apple now. And I'm going pretty fast, mainly because, again, trying not to make this a crazy long demo. Anytime I have demos, by the way, feel free to skip ahead. You're not gonna hurt my feelings. I'm never gonna know. All right, pop in some of this really vibrant green. I see a lot of kind of a brownish color. Let's add a little bit of a cooler green. So I'm gonna add some darker green down here for this reflection. It helps to keep in mind that kind of gestural approach, right? Where you're working general to specific. And just notice we're kind of blocking in colors. I'm layering a lot on top of each other. And now I'm gonna mix. So I can mix with my fingers, or I can take a little bit of a paper towel. It helps to kind of fold them into a point like this. And I can kind of softly blend this together, right? So when in doubt, a lot of people don't like the texture of chalk pastels or materials, especially if you're working with oil pastels. You're definitely gonna wanna use a paper towel because it works a lot better. But you'll notice that it does pick up some of the pigment, which is good, right? Because we're getting that base color down first. Now, I'm not worrying about losing some of my edges right now. I'm gonna bring those back in. So I'm gonna add a lot more warmth to this. Let's go for a little bit more yellow at the top here. That kind of ring. A little bit more of, I need a cooler green. You're gonna hear me talk to myself a little bit. That happens. All right, so notice I'm kind of flitting back and forth. Now, if I wanted this to be darker, I need this to be darker, you can obviously add black, but sometimes when you add black to certain colors, I'll kind of do this off to the side. Just a little bit of black goes a long way. It doesn't quite get the color that you see. It can work really well, not dissing it at all, but I encourage you to play around with color combinations and go across the color wheel, right? So I know these are kind of blue greens. I'm gonna go for a red. Just mix in a little bit of red. It's gonna get me a very unsaturated color, but it might be something closer to the shadow that I see, right? And you can see that this didn't suck too much of the green out. Got me a very muted color, but without being it too, I can really kind of manipulate the color because it's just pure color and it's not a kind of additive, right? So I like this color a little bit better than maybe just adding black because it has that richness to it. So I'm gonna go ahead and just sprinkle a little bit of the red on. Really, really light pressure, right? I'm never doing this unless I really want that highly pigmented color. I'm gonna blend this out. And start building up my tone really slowly. Now, chalk pastels obviously can have a kind of texture to them. I can take my towel and really kind of smooth this out. And I'm gonna bring back my contours at the very end, right? So I'm not quite ready to do that yet. Gonna add in some brown, maybe a touch of red, to get that kind of shadow. Also think about, when you're thinking about blocking in different colors like this, think about how you can add color in a way that contributes to the volume of the form, right? We talked about this in a couple of people's shading exercises earlier in the week or some of the drawings from the first week, right? So think about how you can kind of shade in the direction or blend in the direction that emphasizes the volume of the form, right? So I'm gonna kind of pull up to kind of get that roundness back in of my apple. All right, I'm gonna go for that really intense dark green shadow. This is gonna help really pop this forward a bit more. It's a little more green, wrong color. There we go. Now, obviously my finger is pretty big in comparison to my drawing, so you can use blending sticks to really bring back your contours and sharpen and crisp up your edges. Definitely recommend doing that. The key to color though is really a couple of things. Work very general to specific. Lay down your darker colors last, right? So really start from, if you're mixing your colors on your page like I am, start from your lightest color, right? Notice I didn't go quite for this dark blue to kind of crispen up the shadow. I wanted to give a little bit of a base before I started adding those really dark ones. I'm probably gonna add just a very faint line of black. Use my blending stick to kind of blend this out. So applying your lighter colors first before mixing in your darker colors of any mixture will really help. Make sure you don't go too dark too fast because it's really hard to work back the other way. Experimenting is also key, right? So really kind of playing with color combinations, throwing in some complementary colors, right? Blocking in your form, so don't necessarily, it doesn't have to be so accurate, is one word to put it, from the very beginning, right? You can play around with like co-mixing your colors, blocking in some very general shapes like I did here, before you go in and start like really kind of honing in. The good thing too about like chalk pastels is you can start with really light pressure before you start really going for this kind of very velvety appearance where you kind of start smoothing out. I'm getting more of that kind of skin texture of the apple that I'm looking for where it's that kind of waxy finish. So even though I know I said before, like add really light pressure, you don't want to, sorry, you hear me blowing because I just want to get the dust off. Start with that light pressure where you kind of have this texture and then build up to that waxy texture. This is a lot harder to adjust this color now, whereas if I kind of apply lightly and then start blending and like co-mixing a little bit at a time, I'm gonna have a way better result, something closer to what I imagine and what I see, right? To get some of those muted colors in between of the apple, add a little bit of white, and a little bit of yellow. Now again, I'm not gonna do the whole apple. Just wanted to show you a little bit, right? But I'm gonna bring back this just so you can kind of get this full half here. A little bit of an orange-ish kind of glare. I'm gonna shape this back in, and I'm gonna bring back in this crisp kind of line. So I'm gonna use a little bit of the corner. When it comes to these, I know they're pretty big sticks. There's a couple ways you can do this. You can use the very points. You can also use your, what am I thinking of? Your sandpaper block to kind of bring back any edge. Also, your blending sticks help, right? So I'm gonna add a little bit of white right on top, kind of help pull this line and blend this off. All right, working on the little pit of the apple here, where the stem is. Remember, color is super subjective, right? So if it doesn't quite look like what you see, but you like your end result, leave it, right? There's something about observational color that can be really fun, but equally a little bit of subjectivity in your color is also fine, right? So before I kind of sign off here, another good tip about blending color is to build it slowly. Right, you can see I'm taking my time. This is like probably maybe 40% done, right? I like this part, but like this part needs a lot of work. And obviously I'd wanna like bring back my little wedge here, right? Kind of outline this really quickly. It's okay if it goes really slow, right? And it does take time. Shading takes time, but equally shading with like a color material takes a lot longer, because not only do you have to assess the value, now you have to assess the color mixture as well. And that can be a more daunting task, right? So it's okay if like you spend like an hour on something and it's half finished and you turn it in, right? So it's more about just that experimenting and that process, and knowing that, just because I have it down here doesn't mean I can't erase back into it. Just remember that some colors are really pigmented, and so it can be really tricky to get them back off, right? So obviously, as you can see from my hands, that if you're working with something like chalk pastels, it can be really, really messy. So something between whatever surface you're working on and your paper. It also helps that like once this is done, it's not just gonna stay permanently on there. It can slide off. The pigment's not permanent unless you spray fix it, right? So you can buy a spray fixative, or hairspray also works. Yeah, remember experimentation, and good luck. Let me know if you need help.